Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our podcast for Making Connections, a handbook for effective formal mentoring in academia. My name is Tamara Thorpe, and I am very pleased to be here today with the author of the case study number 3 in chapter 18, Sarah Marshall. The case study is called Intentional Onboarding and Mentoring of New Faculty at Central Michigan University. So hello and welcome, Sarah.
Hi, glad to be here.
So I'm super glad to have you here. You are a professor of educational leadership with an emphasis on higher education administration at Central Michigan University. And there you have served as a leadership fellow for the College of Education and Human Services. And in that capacity, you've developed mentoring and professional programs for pre-tenured faculty, non-tenure faculty, non-tenure track faculty, and also served with the Center for Teaching Excellence, which is where you implemented a program very similar to the one that you're going to talk about today. So I'm excited because you have real life on the ground experience of building something and implementing it. And so I am excited to have that conversation about our case study today, and hope that people after our conversation today are inspired to read it, because you really do provide a wealth of detail about implementing a program. So I'm excited to have you.
Great. Oh, I'm excited to be able to share our experiences.
So tell us what inspired the work that you do in mentoring, and particularly the work that you did, or what inspired this mentoring program?
Yeah, I was just recently reflecting back on it, and something popped into my mind as you were actually talking. And that when I was a pre-tenure faculty member, I remember my department chair came up to me and said, I would like to put in a proposal at the department chairperson's conference about mentoring new faculty and really their orientation and onboarding. And admittedly, not because he was extremely effective at that, but I took the invitation. And so I attended the department chairperson's conference in Orlando, Florida, and shared perspectives from pre-tenure faculty to a group of chairpersons. And it was amazing how, although we had a 3-part presentation, the majority of the questions came to me, and how department chairpersons could better assist new faculty in their onboarding onto campus, but also in their pursuit of tenure and promotion. And so I think it originated there. And over time, once I received tenure, there was a year where my department had 5 new faculty, and I took it upon myself to provide some workshops to help orient them to everything from logistics on our campus to who are our students and how do we teach online. And from there, it just evolved even more to the fact that we had a new dean, and she recognized that we were not doing a very good job at assisting our new faculty as they came to our campus, and put together a professional learning community that had representatives from each one of our departments to come together and talk about how we look at faculty mentoring and how are we ensuring the success and the retention of our faculty. From there, the group brainstormed, shared ideas, did assessments on how we currently mentor within our college. And it was very informal. It was very anecdotal. It was, oh, sure, we mentor, but not really. It was more so, here's a name of someone. If you have questions, go talk to them. And so from that learning community, we basically offered recommendations that we needed to be more intentional as a college and provide mentoring opportunities for our students. And from that, the dean recognized that I of the group had the most passion for this topic and appointed me as a faculty fellow, which gave me time and resources to really dig into the literature about best practices, and then to also develop a program that would, I think, align with the needs of our college. So I guess to the long answer to your short question was, it started way back when I was a pre-tenured faculty member, and now I'm actually our incoming chairperson. So I really have to continue to, I guess, enact some of these ideas and ensure that our all of our faculty are feeling supported and mentored throughout their careers.
Thank you for sharing that. And you brought up a point I wanted to ask about because um, I think in organizations, including in higher ed, we can take for granted that new folks will find their way. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about the importance of onboarding and mentoring in that relationship, because as you said, there had been some informal mentoring, but it wasn't necessarily yielding outcomes. So can you talk about how important that onboarding is?
Well, I think the thing that you have to recognize about faculty is that we're highly educated. And when you come into a new faculty role, you don't want to show your vulnerability and you don't want to expose what you don't know. And oftentimes you're exposing that to your peers who will then have a say in your promotion and tenure. So it's a very precarious position that you want to come in being knowledgeable and understand your roles and responsibilities, but very few new faculty have been mentored in their graduate programs about the realities of the professoriate. And so it's sort of this catch 22 that you don't want to ask for help, but you don't really. But there's so many questions that you have. So I think vulnerability is really important here. I think it's also important to look at different power dynamics within these relationships because oftentimes senior faculty may be perceived as too busy or less accessible. And so, one of the things, and this is jumping ahead a little bit to our program, but one of the things that we tried to initiate was that the mentor needed to be the initiator of many of the communications and connections because the junior faculty felt like they were a bother or they were a burden or they were a hindrance. So I think that when I look at the importance of mentoring and onboarding, we have to really remember that our junior faculty don't even know sometimes what to ask or what to do, or they're just expected to know. And so when we devised our program, we tried to look at how do we have a very strong mentoring component, but also how do we have an onboarding process that complements the mentoring? Because we didn't want to put all the responsibility on the mentor for to be all, see all, do all, and recognize that. So I know that our focus today is on mentoring, but we merged the mentoring with some intentional professional development so that the participants were sort of getting a real holistic perspective about what their expectations are, how the university runs, how do they be, um, how do they succeed in what they do?
Yeah, I like that as I was reading about that in terms of the program in its entirety, that there was a lot of support in the variety of activities you that you had as part of that supported that overall professional development, right? That and not relying on a singular relationship. I think that to me that was really quite intriguing. But before we dive into that, I wanted to talk more about those power dynamics because in your case study, you talk about, factors that you considered for matching. And I thought it was really quite interesting how you ultimately came to the decision to match mentors and mentees from different departments. Can you tell us more about that, and particularly how it relates to that power dynamic?
Sure. Well, most our college is not it's not super large. So we have some departments that are rather small that maybe have anywhere from 8 to 15 faculty. And so we also have a promotion and tenure cycle where the first level of approval starts at the department. So we do not have an external committee that reviews it. So that's part of what we needed to take into consideration, that we wanted to ensure that our new faculty could how do I say it? That they could really be honest about the challenges they were facing, the questions that they had, and didn't have to worry about any political dynamics that might be taking place within their department. But we also recognize the importance of having an internal department member to also help answer questions that are specific to the department. So we intentionally decided that the pairing of the mentor mentee would be from outside of the department. So the mentor had a familiarity with the college, obviously had a familiarity with the department, and they could be that safe space for that faculty member, especially when we're talking about teaching and research and service. I mean, some of those things are more general conversations that don't necessarily have to be indicative to the department. Now, we also made sure that we shared the department bylaws with that external mentor, so they had a familiarity and a reference point. Now, we had mentors from all five of our departments. So if you were a mentor for someone outside of your department, you were also that internal contact. So if the mentor had questions about department dynamics, they could reach out to the person in the department. If the mentee had particular questions, they could go to that internal person in the department. So we did have those resources available, but like I said, we just really felt that it was important that they have that safe space. Not that they couldn't have had that with some department members, but we just really wanted them to be able to speak openly and frankly and not worry about anything getting back to their department or anyone questioning them. So we also looked at different factors when we partnered people. So for example, some of our faculty live in the community where the university is physically located. Others live an hour away or a more of a distance. So we looked at some of that. So if a faculty member maybe wanted to live in our area and wanted to connect with the community, we wanted the mentorship to not only be within the college or university, but we also wanted it to be within the community. We also took into fact other factors such as whether or not they have children and if they wanted to manage. So we tried to look at it as best we could. Now, it makes it sound like I had this huge long list of mentors. I really didn't. But I tried to be as intentional as I could with regard to matching people up based on their personal interests, their professional interests, their research interests. I even asked them if they were qualitative or quantitative researchers so that they could even share some of their methodological expertises. And the other piece is when I put together sort of the strengths of each one of the mentors, I also shared that with the larger group. So if there was something that you as a mentor, so for example, some of our, like my department, our courses are delivered completely online. Others are completely face to face. So if you as that mentor couldn't necessarily provide that information and resources, you had a list of others that you might be able to refer them to.
That's great. And there was also a peer mentoring component to the program.
And that was a pleasant surprise. I guess I should have known. But because we met monthly with our professional development workshop, so every month we had a particular topic and we had a professional development workshop that included lunch and some kind of expert in the area that would talk with the new faculty. But what ended up happening is it created this community among the new faculty. They would come early, they would stay late, they were meeting outside of those meetings because they were the ones who were going through this first year journey together. And so they really also started to create a very strong friendship and a peer mentoring relationship that I guess I should have intuitively knew would happen, but it was a pleasant surprise that they seemed to really, not only they would say, we learned just as much from the people who presented at those workshops as much as we did from our peers talking about some of those topics, because they would then follow up. So let's say the topic might be on, learning outcomes in the classroom, and then they would meet up for coffee and continue that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so powerful. And I think what I really appreciated about your case study was what a comprehensive program it was and how well you outlined that in your chapter. And so as you were putting it all together and reflecting, what are some key takeaways you would like folks to get from reading your case study?
Sure, sure. Well, and also know that we weren't just plucking things out of here or there. I did a lot of research. I read a lot of literature to really talk about what are the different forms of mentoring, what are some of the things you need to take into consideration, and tried to think about how they might adapt to our program. So for example, gosh, I would have loved to have been able to do some group mentoring, but we just didn't have enough people for that. So I don't want it to sound like this is the end all be all. There are other ways that you can go about this. But I think there's two big takeaways I have. One is that mentoring has to be intentional. It to be intentional. I've been asked to be mentors for professional organizations where they just give each other our email and just expect us to connect in some way. So I think the intentionality has to do with a lot of different things. One is that you have clear expectations for what the relationship is going to look like. How often should you be meeting? When should you be meeting? We went so far as to provide topics and discussion questions so that when they sat down, they had something to talk about. That didn't mean they had to talk about that, but it gave them a starting point. So if our focus this month is on teaching, then that was sort of the core of that month and that conversation. And so they'd have these different talking points that they could talk through in case they had any of those sort of awkward silences or they didn't know what they were supposed to talk about, or how many times do you get into a relationship with a mentor and they go, "What do you want to talk about today?" And you go, "I don't know. What do you want to talk about today?" So we tried to be more intentional with that. We also had readings that accompanied those monthly topics. So they could also talk about some of these seminal readings that we provided that might inform best teaching practices, for example. So I think the intentionality is important. I think also making sure that there's someone who's overseeing the process so that you're doing check ins to say, "Are you meeting? How is it going?" There was a time where we just found that one of our mentors was simply too busy, so we swapped that person out. And as opposed to going a year without that mentee having someone, instead, we were willing to make some of those changes if the relationship simply were not what either person wanted to get out of it. So I think that that was really important. Gosh, there was one other thing I was going to say, and now I can't remember what it was going to be. It was the intentionality behind it. Oh, support. That's the other one. So here's the thing. Department chairs especially are they're a little protective of their junior faculty, and they feel an obligation to serve as that mentor for them. But our department chairpersons are super, super busy. But if you walk in and say, "Hey, you're really not mentoring them, so guess what? I'm going to step in and help out with that," that doesn't go over very well. So I think part of what's really important is making sure you get buy-in from some of those key individuals. So I needed to make sure to include our department chairs in the development of the program, in the explanation of the program, in talking about what their role would be in the program. And I really talked about how this program could complement the mentoring they were already providing. So I think it's really important, especially with those folks, to have them on board because they're also the ones that will then promote the program, help you find mentors within the department. So I think that that the not only the support of the dean, obviously, but the support of those department chairs is really critical.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that intentionality. And so given that you had sort of seen what it was like when the mentoring wasn't intentional and then put the intention in, what were some of the benefits and outcomes you saw from the work that you did?
Oh, there just seem to be so many. The other piece I should also say too, since I coordinated and then also attended all the professional development workshops, I think I became a de facto mentor for some of them as well. So I think that part was really refreshing too. I remember we ended up having a faculty member at the end of her second year who decided that she wanted to leave the profession. And I remember having lunch with her and talking about how how helpful the mentoring program was for her because it really gave her a strong understanding of what the expectations are and what her life would continue to look like. And it just didn't align with her long term goals. And so while we were sad to see that professor leave, I think it really helped inform her decision. We've also seen, I even think about, we've got one relationship from our very first year in the program that they still work together. I, I paired a senior faculty member with a new faculty member, and their relationship just really blossomed. And the they were able to rekindle the research agenda of the senior faculty and then help promote the research agenda of the junior faculty. And they've written like 6 articles together, tons of presentations together. And,
Wow.
the literature talks about how does mentoring not only benefit the tenure track faculty, but how does it also benefit that senior faculty? And so
Yeah.
we have found great rewards and rejuvenation among our more senior faculty because it's helped them find new purpose as they're helping to guide those junior folks or folks that are earlier in their careers. So I think overall, the feedback that we've received through our assessments is that they found it to be incredibly helpful and overwhelming, especially if the mentoring match worked well and they both followed through.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing that because there's that a reciprocity that can happen when the right intention and supports are in place that both the mentor and mentee walk out with lots of incredible benefits and rewards.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I imagine that for our podcast and for the book, we have a lot of folks listening and reading who are building out a mentoring program, perhaps for the first time. And so, in thinking about all the work that you did, what do you think is something that really is a must have for a program?
Absolutely. Well, I think obviously the first and most important must have is the support of your, I guess in our case, in our college, because it was a college wide program, was our dean. And she was able to allocate or give me the gift of time to be able to develop this. She also provided the funding that was essential for the program to move forward. And then she also provided sort of the, not, I don't want to say the initiative, but really reinforced the importance of our college culture and what we were trying to achieve and how this program would help support that college culture. So I think the support of your leadership is going to be really critical. And she also recognized that it was going to probably take some time. And also that some years we have only a few hires versus some years we have many hires. And so it's that support has to be ongoing if you want the program to continue. I think another piece that's really critical would be the role of those senior faculty and their willingness to participate. I must say that especially in the first few years, I shoulder tapped key people that I knew would be strong, good, effective mentors who would follow through. So I wanted to ensure the success of the program. So I kind of pulled our best and brightest to get involved. The other thing that I think is important is, and again, it goes back to intentionality. I trained the mentors. We had a training session where we talked about what does it mean to be a mentor and what are those expectations. Again, you just don't want to take anything for granted. And we talked about everything from what was your best mentoring relationship, what was your worst, how do you be that good mentor, how do you help them. And so we just really wanted to make sure that people moved into this program and moved into these relationships with the skills that they needed. And we also at midterm did a lunch. I did a lunch with those mentors to say, and mentees in another room, but how's it going? And
Yeah.
what do you like? What do you appreciate? What do you need? Again, just that real, I guess, person to help guide the process through. So,
That's
those-
excellent.
I love them. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of as I've been meeting with other authors, that buy-in at the top really is key, and I appreciated that in your case study how much support you had. What would you consider a nice to have? Right, we can't always get all the the must-haves. What would you consider as a nice to have?
Oh, goodness. Um, I think lunches are nice to have. Um, our faculty time is very, very, it's very sparse. And so you want to make sure that the time that you have with them is meaningful and purposeful. So it's nice to have food so that they can sit down together and they feel like they're nourishing themselves while they're also getting this additional information, which I think is also really help. Um, let's see, I'm trying to think about other nice to haves. I mean, I guess if you're doing a true only mentoring program, that the components of that are most essential. So some would say that maybe our professional development opportunities were nice to have. But again, I think that they went sort of hand in hand.
Right.
So for us, those professional development opportunities were really important. So
Yeah.
I remember we have for our pre-tenured faculty, they do an annual review. And that annual review is a little bit less formal, but I remember we had a PD session on preparing for that annual review, and no one had talked to them about that. No one had given them that information. And I just
Mhm.
feel like that's if your mentor misses something, then I mean, it's just it's hard to put all that ownership on that mentor. So we
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure we had other components. But I guess technically, if you're only focusing on mentoring, those
Yeah.
others would be nice to have.
Yeah, but I think to your point, it's being really clear on what your purpose is, and specifically in this case, where the purpose was supporting the onboarding. Having those professional development courses were really essential to what you were trying to accomplish, ensuring that new faculty had access to all the information and resources so that they felt grounded in their work, and to your point, that fully understood the scope of their roles and responsibilities.
Right. When I first started my faculty career, I was at another institution. I was at a Research One institution, and my institution now is research intensive. So we still have high research expectations, but not quite as the R1. And I remember as being a new faculty member, I was green as all green. And they did these series of professional development workshops, but they were only about research. And that was it. And I remember thinking, "Can someone teach me how to use my phone? Can someone, like, talk to me about, how do I connect with students?" And not to I mean, the research was really important as well, but I had some immediate needs, to
Right.
just be able to function, and I just had no one to go to. So I think you have to also really look at your audience and look at we say it all the time at Center like that just-in-time information. So we looked
Right.
at what do you need right now? And when they first started, what they needed was how do I get a parking pass? And how do I, do some of these things just to how do I get a key to my office? And so we tried to look at it sequentially about what do you need now and what do you need next month and what do you need next month.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. And what would you say is something you could live without?
Hmm. The other thing I was going to say about what would be nice to have, if I would have loved to have had more mentors. It would have been great to have had like a research mentor, a teaching mentor, somebody who could really focus on specific things that we just didn't have enough bodies for that. What could I do without COVID and having to move this all online? Because we really just I feel like the faculty appreciated sort of that one-on-one connection and that
Mhm.
ability to meet for coffee, have that conversation. Um, so I think that's all I can really think about.
Yeah.
Um, I'm trying to, yeah, I can't really think of anything else that I would say we really
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah. Yeah, but sometimes, the unexpected happens and we've got to adapt and adjust, and it is one of the catch 22s that mentoring can be powerful both in a in-person and virtual medium. And some have a preference for both, but it is right in the midst of running a program, having to make a shift for things that are out of your control is a challenge.
I know. And we, at our institution, we're also facing major budget cuts. So we've also had to scale back
Yeah.
on some of those things, which I think is not unique to any other institution. So, that continued support and funding I think is important. But our dean had really recognized that the retention of our faculty and our faculty are our greatest assets. And
Yeah.
so being able to help them to maximize their potential and be successful at our institution is an investment worth making.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of the things that I talk to, my clients in my work all the time. Attrition is expensive, right? And a small investment in thorough onboarding and mentoring programs ultimately save you money in the end. And it can be difficult for folks to see that return on that investment up front when you're trying to get buy-in and trying to get a budget.
Absolutely. And again, if you really want to create a culture of inclusivity with clear expectations of what faculty roles and responsibilities are, you have to be intentional about communicating that. And I think
Yeah.
oftentimes we just take that for granted, and then we wonder why some faculty aren't engaged in service and some are doing this or that. And a lot of it's because we haven't clearly communicated what our expectations are.
Yeah. Well, I think the work that you did is very impressive. I think you shared tremendous amount in your case study. And I think for folks who are looking to support new faculty, new staff, new employees, that there's a real model in your chapter for how to do that and do so in a very thorough and, as you said, research-based, thorough, comprehensive way to do that. So thank you so much. Is there anything before we close our conversation today that you want to share with the audience and encourage them to dive into that case study?
No, I just think it's worth the time and energy, and especially to just support our new colleagues. I think that it's our obligation within our
Yeah,
profession. So whether it's formal or informal, you can, like I said, I started out taking it on myself. And so I think that mentoring can even be that grassroots of one person caring enough to try to help our new colleagues transition into this really different environment.
yeah. Yeah, no, thanks for that. I think it's a good reminder, particularly for someone who might just be thinking about getting mentoring. The idea of doing something so comprehensive can be overwhelming. So sometimes the first step is just taking the first step and putting yourself out there.
Well, and I will say I had in another form of my life in my professional organization and some research I've done about women and how they manage work and family. One of the pieces a participant had told me was that she just didn't have any mentors. And it goes back to the intentionality. So she went to her, I think it was AVP, and said, "Would you mentor me?" And I
Yeah,
think that we just wait for mentorship to just fall out of the sky or for it to evolve organically. So
yeah.
if your institutions don't have formal mentoring programs, there's no reason why you can't reach out to someone and say, I like the way you lead and I would like to learn from you. Would you be willing to mentor me? And start to develop that relationship.
Yeah, yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, because there is a great chapter that talks about the self-directed mentee, and sometimes it is the initiative of the mentee to build a relationship, and very often in your case, it is the passion of an individual who can get something big started that has quite the ripple effect. So thank you so much, Sarah, for contributing to your university and your community with the mentoring program, and then sharing that experience in our book and with us here today.
Great. Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you, everyone, for joining, and we look forward to talking to you in our next podcast.